Moms who know do less so they can focus on what matters most, taking care of themselves, their families, and living their God-given purpose. Moms who know focus on the little things they can do that grow to have a huge impact. You are connecting with your family, your true self, and your God-given purpose. You are a mom who knows. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and my husband, James, is joining me today for this episode of Couples Who Know. So today's episode was really inspired by some serious TV watching done by our kids. They really like the show Phineas and Ferb, and I have to say that is one of my favorite kid shows too. It's really funny and clever, and if you haven't watched it, definitely check it out. But if you have, you'll know what I'm talking about here. So in Phineas and Ferb, there is an evil scientist.
Yes, Dr. Doofenshmirtz.
Yes, Dr. Doofenshmirtz. And he's always coming up with these evil inventions, these evilinators. Mm-hmm. And in episode after episode, he comes up with these inventions to create evil, but they never work. And the reason they always work is because, they always fail is because he always builds in a self-destruct button. And his nemesis, who is a platypus, will often use the self-destruct button to end his evil and change his evil ways. And so it's funny in the show, right? He's just always being thwarted because of his own choice, because of building in a self-destruct button. And so today we're going to talk about 3 self-destruct buttons that you might be building into your marriage unintentionally and ways that we can avoid putting these self-destruct buttons on our marriage, because we don't want to be like Dr. Doofenshmirtz. We want our marriage to succeed. We want to see our marriage thrive and grow. So James is going to start with the first self-destruct button.
Well, first I have to say, I think it's pretty hilarious that this podcast is inspired by Phineas and Ferb. But it is, I just have to put my 2 cents in there. It is pretty enjoyable, less painful than a lot of other shows,
Definitely.
Right? That our kids watch.
Yes.
Johnny Test is one that comes to mind. Okay. So I'm excited about this because we've been talking about this on our walks, and we've been talking about these self-destruct buttons for a little while now. And the first button, if you can imagine in your mind, is a big button with the letter D on it. And that D stands for divorce. So this self-destruct button of divorce. And let me tell you our thinking behind this. So I've got a good friend that told me once, James, and he's older than I am, quite a bit older than I am. And he said, James, every marriage is going to have the D word come up at least once in it, and embrace yourself. And I remember this was years ago, and I remember thinking, wait, what? Why? Like, there's this, we're going to talk about divorce. It's going to happen. And he just kept saying, it's going to happen. And it's going to come up in your marriage. And I remember taking a mental note thinking like, no, I don't want that to come up in my marriage. I don't even want that in the back of my mind. And so, I don't think he was trying to be hurtful, or, that's everybody's entitled to their perspective, and that's great. I just remember pondering that a lot, thinking, I don't want to have a self-destruct button of divorce in the background, because it is so destructive. And I think that it's an out. Do you know what I mean by that? When we were talking about that, it's a way to...
Yeah, I think that just letting yourself think like, well, it's going to come up. Everyone, has in the back of their mind, well, it might not work out. And this is normal for us to think it might not work out. And if it doesn't, then divorce is an option.
Right. I just think it's so dangerous. And, why not plan for the future instead of having an escape plan? Right. That's just what makes sense to me. I ran across this pretty cool statistic on this website, AmericanValues.org. And it said this. So it says, most unhappy couples who are considering divorce that stay together are happier 5 years later. Really interesting. The truth is shocking. 86% of unhappily married people who stick it out find that 5 years later, their marriages are happier. And this is according to a national survey of families and households. Most say they've become very happy indeed. And I thought that that was a really interesting statistic, that most people who just stick it out, that's not everyone. And I understand that. So I'm not making a generalized statement here. They said it's 86%. So I would say that that's pretty encouraging. That's a pretty high percentage of like not just throwing it away, working it out. And when they do work it out, that it's even happier. I think that's kind of neat.
Yeah, it really is encouraging, because if you're in a place where marriage is kind of tough right now, it might seem like, well, I'll stick it out for the kids, or I'm going to stay and suffer through because I don't want to divorce. But it's encouraging to know that it's not just going to be as miserable in 5 years as it is now. If you work at it, there is absolutely hope of it being better and happier in the future.
Right. And I think with that mindset, okay, we might be going through a rough time, but it can be better. And I want it to be better. And I know that there's a lot involved with that. Both spouses have to be on board. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. I would just hope that we don't have that automatic self-destruct button of divorce, push, done. I don't have to deal with this anymore. That makes me sad.
Totally. And along with that, so how the divorce button, I think, shows up in marriage is a couple different ways. One is maybe when people are angry, using it out loud verbally to say, that I'm thinking about divorce, or I want a divorce, to say in anger is a really scary thing. Or then, like what James has been talking about, to just have it in the back of your mind that, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, then this is my escape route.
Right,
this is my out. I remember many years ago reading an article in a parenting magazine. I can't remember which one. And this dad, it was written by a dad, and he said that his daughter had asked him, will you and mommy always stay married and always love each other? And he looked at her and he said, I can't promise you that, but I promise you that I will always love you. And the point of this article was, he's telling the truth to his kid. He's being very forthcoming. I really was frustrated by this article because I felt like you've already promised your wife to be with her forever. You've promised to stay married to her. I know things happen. I know we don't live in a perfect world, but you have already made promises. And so our goal as parents, our goal as married spouses needs to be to keep the promises we have already made. And so I would be really interested to follow up with the man that wrote that article and see where he is now all these years later. And to see, because he had in the back of his mind, nope, I can't promise you that I'm going to stay in this marriage. And I think we absolutely need to have the perspective that I am going to do everything it takes to stay in this marriage, and not just to stay, but to make it a happy marriage.
Right.
Recognizing that sometimes it doesn't work out. Yeah, sure. That is reality, but not putting that self-destruct button front and center on the top of your marriageinator, right? Right. Where you can see it. So I think that that's really a different perspective. And one other thought I had on this self-destruct button of divorce is our daughter went on a date to the corn maze, this local corn maze that they do. And at the beginning of the corn maze, there was a little picture of the maze, and you could get out your cell phone and take a picture so that you would know which way to go in the maze, and you would have an easy way out. And she and her date decided to do it the hard way. They didn't take a picture, and they went through the maze and they got really lost, and they didn't have an easy way out. And when they went into the maze, they wanted to do it the hard way. They wanted to have to figure it out. But when they got in the maze and it was hard, had they had that easy way out, they would have pulled up their phones. They were getting kind of frustrated. They wanted to get out of the maze at that point. And I was just thinking of how interesting that is. Sometimes in the heat of, when things are hard, whether it be in a corn maze or a marriage, We think, oh, I just want out. And it can be very helpful to remember our feelings back at the beginning of the corn maze, back at the beginning of the marriage. Why didn't I take that picture at the beginning of the corn maze? Because I wanted to do this the hard way. I wanted to stick it out. I wanted to see where it leads. And so remembering those things instead of giving ourselves a way out as our first option.
I just have one last thought on this divorce button. I really like that. I think it's so applicable, this idea of a maze. All of our marriages are so different. There's no handbook. There's no picture. There's lots of books, but there's no picture of how your and your spouse's marriage is going to look. And count on it. There's going to be times when you get stuck. And the easy way out, would be to look at that picture of the maze and then just take the quick exit. And that's the divorce button. But persevering and really being in it to win it, you'll get to the end. You'll make it. So
yes.
Cool. Good thought.
Okay, awesome. So button number two, self-destruction button number 2 is blame or fault finding, which is where you really just look at what's going on in your life and you say, you know what? This is because of you. This is because of my spouse that all this is going wrong. And I have a story. This comes from the Book of Mormon. So I know some of you are not familiar with the Book of Mormon. Also, I'll explain what this experience is. So there was a family and they were commanded by God to leave their home in Jerusalem and to move out into the wilderness. And they had 4 boys in this family, and 2 of them were on board and 2 of them were really not. And they had a rough go of it in the wilderness. They were traveling. Their wives had to give birth in the wilderness. They a lot of times went without food or without good food. And, back in Jerusalem, they had a lot of possessions and a lot of money. And the brothers who were not with the program, at one point, they turned to their younger brother and they said, if we would have stayed in Jerusalem, everything would have been good. We would have had all our stuff and we would have had all our money. And then they say something really instructive, yay, and we might have been happy. And they were basically saying, all this stuff has happened and we would have been happy if we would have stayed back there. And I think we can really see this play out in our lives. We sometimes decide in our mind, I could have been happy if only I had married someone else. If only he picked up his socks off the floor. If only, he had a better job so we had more money. And finding this way to blame and give our partner responsibility for our happiness. I think the truth is in this story that I explained, I don't think those guys would have been happy in Jerusalem with all their stuff. I don't think they would have been happy anywhere. Happiness is an inside job. It comes from what we decide to be happy about. And in our marriage, when we see the good things and we choose not to blame, that's going to lead to a lot more happiness in our marriage, in our relationship, and all kinds of things. Another really interesting thing about blaming is that when we blame, it really makes us reactive instead of active. So it's taking away all of our power. It takes away our responsibility and our agency. And it's saying, I don't have any responsibility over my own happiness. I'm going to hand that all over to my spouse. And if he doesn't, step up and take care of my happiness, well, then, he did a bad job. And that makes you really sad because that leaves you feeling powerless. And that also is a really big self-destruct button because it leaves you without a lot of choices. It's like, well, he is not making me happy. And so because he's not making me happy, the only thing I can change is him, our marriage.
Wow. I love it. You are so wise. Those are good thoughts. I really thought that was a good story. And how you tied it in. Really good. I want to talk about kind of the flip side of that, blame. And this comes from a thought by Dr. John Gottman. And it's a segment in this book I was reading, Learn to Live with It. And I thought this was really applicable to blame. He talks about principles of making a marriage work. And again, statistics. I like statistics. So he says 69% of relationship problems consist of unsolvable problems or unsolvable issues. These include the little things about your partner that rub you the wrong way and lead to nitpicking. And I think this is a pretty good thought, because these little nitpicky things can really start to wear out the marriage. They're these seemingly small things, but that you nitpick your spouse on, but it really can have a huge impact on the relationship as a whole. And he says, first and foremost, just be nice. Be nice. And when you feel like picking out a flaw, turn your own thinking around to simply be kind and show respect. A compliment can be far more helpful. And I totally agree with that. I think that, living with, why aren't they making me happy? Or them doing this is making me not happy. Right. So I was kind of thinking about this in our marriage, thinking about, okay, like what nitpick things do I do? And, I want to share with this. This isn't to say that you're a nitpicker. So she's like, what? Oh boy. No. So sometimes I'll whistle and it'll be a little annoying. Like I admit, I don't know. Like sometimes hearing whistling, maybe this doesn't faze any of you, but sometimes hearing whistling can be a little annoying. And so sometimes I'll start whistling. And Chanel's told me before, like, I don't know.
Even before we got married, I let you know, like that is something I just don't like the sound of.
Kind of hits a nerve, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, what's our problem? I'm whistling because I'm happy. So what's interesting about this and where I'm going with this is, I think over the years, like she has restrained herself. I've noticed. Okay, so this is actually turning out to be a compliment.
Okay, good.
I've noticed, like I've caught myself whistling, right? And to her credit, Chanel hasn't really said anything. She might leave the room, but she doesn't say anything. She doesn't make a big deal of it. And sometimes she'll just be reading and she'll just not say anything. And I'm like, oh, like I'm whistling, and I know that's kind of a hot button for her. And like, so then I'll say, can I hum? Just kidding. That's a little Shrek reference for you guys. No, so then I'll stop. Just that can play off of each other, right? So if you know something bothers your spouse, you can try to not do that. But on the flip side, if you are the one that it bugs, then you can show some patience too. But to John Gottman's point, there are some things that you just are not going to be able to fix, right? Like I can't feel like this. I can't make myself stop whistling if I just start doing it, mindlessly doing it, but I can come to a point where I realize it. Anyway, those things, he says 69% of our relationship problems consist of unsolvable issues, and whistling came to mind. I don't know. Do you have anything?
That's funny. Well, I just have a follow-up question on that statistic, because I think it's really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is that a heartening statistic or a disheartening statistic? Because when I hear, I'm like, oh man, 70%, almost 70% of things that bug you are never going to change.
I think you could take it either way. I think that if you're looking at it like, oh my gosh, well then 70%, but that's going to be with anybody. And I don't know all of the details of this study, and maybe they're just very small little things, but I think the point that I'm taking from it is, if you're going to let something bother you and turn into a big thing, then it could be a big thing that affects your marriage. And so just realize, my takeaway is realize that there are going to be some things, hopefully not 69% of things you do bother me. Right. Realize there's going to be some things that I should live with and I should be okay with. And yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Saying. And I think that's really good, because it puts the duty, the responsibility of change on us to say, this is who I married. And, there might be some things that bother me, things that I don't like, but instead of blaming, I am going to do what I can to let those things go, because
Right. And one of John Gottman's points is, okay, so if you are going to nitpick and blame everything, then your spouse is going to begin to feel like, I can't do anything right. Like this person's just, they don't like anything I do. They're blaming me for everything. And I can't make this person happy. And I think that is one of the things that we should be really concerned about. That's kind of alarming. We don't want to make our spouse feel like I just can't make this person happy, or feel that I can't make this person happy.
Yeah, definitely.
So the third button, did you have anything else on that, babe? Okay. We're going to move on to the third button here. And this is the comparison button. Okay. This is a big self-destruct, but a big marriage destruction button. I feel like I hear it, and it's. I've done it before too. It's you compare with other marriages. They do this, and why don't we do this? And I mean, you can apply it to so many different aspects of marriage. I mean, even you can say even with sex, like they're having this much, and so we should do this. And it just can. I've heard of stuff like that. That's why I bring that up. And it's like, well, that's going to be something for you and your spouse to talk about. You don't need to compare what other couples are doing. That might not work for you guys. And so I think that we really need to be careful of this comparison. Even a podcast. Well, they do a podcast together. And so why don't my spouse and I do a podcast? Like this isn't good. And so there are some things that can be good about, looking at different perspectives, and they do this, and maybe this is something I want to do, or great. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying this comparison of, once you start, it's like you could just go down that road and not be happy for so many different things. What comes to mind for you?
Well, so I was thinking, we always hear like social media. When you look at social media, that it's people's highlight reel, it's like them at their best. And I was thinking, anytime you're comparing with another person's marriage, you are comparing to their highlight reel, because you are seeing people when they're out and about, they have their makeup on and their clothes on instead of their sweats and their hair in a ponytail and, first thing in the morning and all that stuff. And so it's really, anytime you compare, it's an unfair comparison because you don't ever get to see the whole picture. And whether that's, I feel like if you're comparing in your own mind and you're saying, oh, but my marriage is like this, and you're looking at someone else, first of all, that comparing in your thoughts, it's going to make you feel bad. You're never going to measure up because you're only seeing the good things of other people's marriage for the most part. And you see the whole picture of your own marriage. And then another thought I had on this self-destruct button of comparison is that when you verbally compare, when you are comparing out loud to your spouse, things like, oh, why can't you be more like that person? Or expressing dissatisfaction because, that couple is doing this or whatever it may be, that's going to make your spouse feel bad. So whether it's your own thoughts making you feel bad or your words making your spouse feel bad, either way, comparison leads to a lot of dissatisfaction in your marriage. And it really is unfair to compare that tiny sliver you see of someone else's marriage with the whole entire picture that you see of your own.
So true. One phrase that keeps coming into my mind is, why can't you just? And I've heard that before, and I've heard friends say that. Why can't you just do what she does in that marriage? Why can't you just be like this? And I just think it's really harmful when we do that. And that's comparison. That's what that is. So I really appreciate Chanel in our marriage trying to avoid comparison, because she could call me out on a lot of things, that other husbands do. And I just appreciate that my spouse accepts me for who I am. And when things need to be improved, I know that we can talk about it together, and it's safe, because she's not going to say, hey, why can't you just be like this person? I think that that's, again, so damaging.
Yeah, I think that is one other thing is when you compare. So there's comparison in your own mind, there's comparison to your spouse. And then there's when you compare when you're together with friends and you're like speaking to your friends about your spouse.
Oh, totally. Yes. Getting teams.
Yeah.
Right? Forming teams, I think is so harmful. And I'm thinking about people saying like, you deserve better. I can't believe he, or I can't believe she. And it's so easy to play into that, right? Like, yeah, I've been wronged, right? And so you've got this forming thing too. And I'm sorry to brag on you, babe, but I have to do this. Like,
Rag on me or brag on me?
brag on you, not
well,
rag.
then I'll allow it.
You'll allow it. Okay, good. Chanel's told me early on in our marriage, like, I will never talk about you behind your back. And I've so appreciated that. And I think that maybe came, you can correct me if I'm wrong, early in our marriage when maybe you were around some other girlfriends and like they were just ragging on their husbands.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel so happy. And of course, I'm going to return the favor, like, why do I need to get a team? I understand venting. Sometimes people say, well, I just need a vent. But I would just suggest or caution rather that when we do that, we really set ourselves up for some failure because, yeah, people are going to want to feed into your sorrow. They're going to want to be, I guess, what they deem compassionate. And then it's this rag fest on your spouse and it turns into something pretty ugly.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I think that's a really great point. I hope that these have been helpful. So these 3 self-destruct buttons, things you absolutely want to avoid in your marriage, the button of divorce, the button of blame, and the button of comparison. So today I am going to ask James for his idea for one little thing that you hope people take away from this conversation we've had today, either in something they do or something that they think differently because of what they've heard.
Okay. I'm thinking over our conversation here. I'm going to have to say the one little thing for me is realize there are some things in your spouse that you just can't fix or that you are not going to be able to change. Just realize that there are some things in your spouse that you need to accept. And of course, glaring things you shouldn't accept, if abuse, things like that. Of course, I'm not saying anything like that. But just maybe take a minute to ponder some things that might bug you or irritate you about your spouse and think about if you can let those things go.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, James. Now I'm going to ask you guys the same question. What one little thing are you going to do differently or think about differently because of what you have heard today? Let us know on Facebook or Instagram at Moms Who Know Podcast. Thank you for being here. And thank you, as always, for listening to Moms Who Know.